Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Kenny Francis from Indivisible New Orleans. I'm the vice president. Thank you for joining us again. If you missed us last night we had Representatives Mandy Landry and Matt Willard explaining this year's constitutional amendments on the ballot on November 3rd. If you missed that, you can go back and you can find it either on our YouTube page, Indivisible NOLA, or our Facebook page by the same name. I highly recommend that you go back and watch that one. We had a great hour with Mandy and with Matt. It was very informative, and I know how I'm going to vote now on the constitutional amendments, which I definitely did not know how I was going to vote before that, because the constitutional amendments can be super confusing. So I'm really glad that they were able to join us and go over all of those for us and explain them to us so that we can be informed voters. That's the goal of all of these forums, is to help people be more informed voters by giving you the information you need to be able to make decisions come November for the elections. So what we're going to be doing today is it's our second forum of the week. I'm going to introduce our guests in a second. Today, we're going to be talking about the district attorney. We're going to be talking about what they do, what their powers are, what your expectations of them should be, and what they legally can and cannot do. So as you go to one of the many DA forums, of which we're having a couple ourselves at Indivisible, you can know what kinds of questions to ask, you can know what's important to ask, and you can know what is actually within the power of the district attorney. Because I think one of the things that we can all get better at is knowing what is actually the purview of our elected officials so that we can hold them accountable to that. Because if you're asking them to do something that's not within their power, obviously that's not an effective way to advocate for change. And also, if you don't know that they can do something and you don't ask for it, that's also not an effective way to advocate for change. And so the goal with all of these forums is to really clarify the roles and responsibilities of each of these positions, and also clarify when we have the candidates on the positions of the candidates and their plans, so that when it comes around in November and it's time to vote, that everyone can go into the ballot box feeling comfortable with their choices and pull that lever and participate in our process. Because as I want to remind y'all, I know a lot of y'all watched that dumpster fire, which is the nice way I could say it, of a presidential debate yesterday. And this is your daily reminder that your local politics and your state politics will impact you much, much more than your national politics was. I would actually argue, and Sarah, feel free to disagree with me, that your district attorney probably impacts your life and the life of your neighbors and your community members much more than the president does. So this district attorney's race here in New Orleans, I would argue, is probably more important than who eventually becomes president or not. And all the other things, the judgeships that are up for vote, the school board races that are up for vote. With that, I'm getting ahead of myself. I do want to give everyone a reminder about, we have a couple more forums coming up this week. We have one on Sunday at the same time, 7:30. It's going to be the first of our school board forums with Dr. Patrice Centino, who's running for District 1. On Monday, October 5th, we have another school board forum, is District 2, with the candidates from that. And I forgot one. Tomorrow, we're participating in a forum for the DA's race. So you can take everything you learned from Sarah today and use it tomorrow for a DA forum. Tomorrow's DA forum is being put on by the Youth Justice Coalition, which we at Indivisible New Orleans are part of. And they're going to be talking specifically about youth justice issues and asking the candidates about what their plans are for our juvenile justice system. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our guest for tonight. Her name is Sarah Omojola. I got to meet Sarah a couple of years ago when we were both in different jobs than we are now. I think Sarah's really great and really intelligent, and I'm really, really thankful for the work that she does and that she was able to do this tonight. Welcome, Sarah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tell us about yourself. Who are you? Where do you work? What do you do?
I didn't know that I was going to be on the speed dating show. So I am the associate director at Vera's New Orleans office, so Vera Institute of Justice. And there we are working on, among many things, reshaping prosecution. That's one of our biggest priorities, but also we work on reducing the use of jails, figuring out ways to support people so that they can get to mandatory hearings. We also figure out how to eliminate or reduce the use of bail, fines, and fees, which are a form of wealth extraction from people. Previously, I'm a New Orleanian. I was raised here, and I taught here, went to law school here, and am all about New Orleans. and have done a lot of work in the criminal legal system, in reform and advocacy, and I'm still, of course, learning a million things. But yeah, I'm excited to be here with y'all.
Thank you for joining us. All right, and so here's how this is going to work tonight. So Sarah has a presentation for us, which I'm excited to see and learn about myself. So she's going to go over the presentation. I'm going to be checking the chat box to see if there are questions. If you have a question, as you can see in the banner there at the bottom of your screen, you can submit them at Slido, that's slido.com, and the event code is Justice. Once you input your questions there, I will see them, I will ask them to Sarah, and she will do her best to answer them. And so with that, I'm going to pull up the screen here so you can see your slides. All right, let's get started. You take it away.
Okay, awesome. So just a little bit about Vera Institute of Justice. We're a criminal legal system reform nonprofit focused on data and policy. And of course, one of our priority areas is prosecution in the district attorney's office. Our goal is really to give people the information and tools that they need to decide which district attorney candidate reflects their values. And with that, I have to say, as a disclaimer, that Vera is a 501c3 and we don't endorse or oppose any candidate or party. Our goal, again, is to educate and really encourage participation. I would agree with what Kenny said earlier, that your district attorney has a lot of power over your life, and in some cases, it might be more than the president, or sometimes more than your mayor, right? So what we're going to do today is I'm going to take you through like 7 decision points of the district attorney. And in order to understand which candidate to vote for, again, like Kenny said, it's really important to know what the role entails. And I've said this before, but I think it's apt. I remember when I was in high school and we were voting for the freshman class president, and each candidate was like, oh, I'm going to give everybody free pizza. That's not in their role. They can't do that. And as a youngster, I was like, oh yes, I'm voting for that person. But again, they have no say over that. So, this really is going to be focused on looking at the district attorney's role. It's one of the most influential and powerful positions in the criminal legal system. And, one of the things that this presentation is really going to cover is what the role of the DA actually is, what decisions they actually make or can make, and what is the impact on people of those decisions. I will provide this brief explanation of these critical decision points, and then also I'll share this presentation afterwards with Indivisible, and y'all can share it around. And I will also share my information and then a link for our voter tools, which include these questions and this information, so that folks can stay engaged.
And we'll be sure to send this out on our newsletter. So if you're not subscribed to our newsletter, you can subscribe by going to indivisiblenola.com, and I'll be sure to make sure that the newsletter goes out and you get these slides and all the other resources that Sarah's going to share.
Great, awesome. So the first decision point that a district attorney has in the criminal legal system has to do with bail. It's really important to note for all of this that real life is not like Law and Order. And so things aren't cut and dried or black and white or as clear as you would think. And so the role here is that bail is set by a magistrate or a commissioner in New Orleans, and it can be changed by the section judge. So if we're going in order of how a person might enter the system, they would be arrested. And then at their first appearance after arrest, the district attorney could decide, let me advocate for this person to be released. They call it release ROR, released on your own recognizance, which means that you can just leave and we trust that you will come back to court. Or the district attorney could advocate for money bail or no bail, which means that either you need to put up some money for the bail if you have it, or you have no bail and you're just kept in jail. So they haven't asked for you to, they haven't given you an option of paying bail or not. One of the ways that this plays out, and I'm going to just share a story of this young couple that got into a verbal fight outside of their house. Neighbors called the police, who arrived and then basically told them, one of you has to go to jail. And that is a strange policy choice. And I think some of us have heard that sometimes is a policy choice with domestic disturbance. But we're talking about the district attorney today, so I'm not going to talk about the police. But the wife in this couple said, we're fine. Like, I just, we're fighting over my phone. I just want my husband to give me my phone back. No one should go to jail. The police persisted. We're like, no, somebody is going. So basically the husband volunteered that to go to jail in this instance. And the next day, at his first appearance, the public defender who was working on this case, talked to him about what happened. And he basically explained, like, look, we got into a fight, maybe it got a little loud, but essentially, like, we both work at Waffle House and we have kids. And in the morning, she works, I watch the kids, I work at night, she watches the kids. And so they traded off, childcare, and they both had these jobs. And so he was basically like, we can't be here because if I am, detained, then, she's probably going to lose her job too, because we don't have anyone to watch our kids. And so, what ended up happening was, this and also his wife was at this first appearance, and she said the same thing and was like, look, it got out of hand, but I need him to come home because, I have a shift. And what ended up happening was the district attorney asked for a money bail to be set, and talked about domestic violence and how dangerous it is, and it being a serious problem, which are true, but did not take into account, right, that the wife had said that, that she was there, or that she said there was no problem. And after hearing from the district attorney, the judge decided to set a $5,000 bail, which they could not pay. And so if this was a sad story, and I didn't want to start with a really sad story, so I didn't. Luckily, there is a happy ending here, and a bail fund was able to bail the husband out and pay that $5,000. However, about a third of the people who are in New Orleans jail, or called Orleans Justice Center, are there because they cannot afford to pay money bail. And so, one of the questions that people, really need to ask their district attorney candidates are, will you advocate for release without the use of money bail as the norm and not the exception? And so go ahead.
No, go ahead. So I'm gonna let you finish. I have a question.
Okay. So for each of these sections that we go through, I'm definitely going to bring this up, like what questions you can ask the candidates to figure out what their role is. And since the purpose of bail is to make sure that a person will return to court, the decision that an ADA makes, or the district attorney needs to make, is really about whether that person will come back. And most people do, with or without money bail. And in a few cases, the question is about whether or not this person will commit physical harm to another person. And so those are the calculations that need to be made. And since that's the calculation, really, the question is, what is your position on advocating for release without the use of money bail as a norm and not an exception to the rule? What was your question?
Actually, I'm going to start by just repeating some of that back, because I process things verbally. So it's like really helpful for me to process it back, which is useful for something like this. And it was useful when I was a teacher, but it drives my partner crazy. So like, if I understand this correctly, a district attorney will decide what their policy is for their office on bail. And the assistant district attorneys, who are the people who actually like do this work and like decide these things, have to follow it. And so I guess what I'm missing here is like, what is the point of money bail other than to keep poor people in jail if they can afford bail? Like, is there any other purpose? Like, what, asked in a different way, what would be a good reason to set a money bail?
So yeah, that is a great question. The use of money bail is to make sure that a person comes back. Like, that was the purported use, right? That's why we started this, so that we can make sure that people came back and they came and got their money. but that's not really how this.
Because it's like you pay it and you get it back if you show
Pay it and you get it back. However, when you think about how it works, if you don't have $5,000 to put up, what you do is you pay a bondsman. They keep your money. They put up the whole amount. You come back and they get the money back, right?
And because capitalism, bondsmen typically charge ridiculous like interest rates and stuff like that.
So yes, their interest rates, et cetera. So, but even in that scenario, if you use a bondsman, you don't get your money back. So the money isn't the thing that's making you come back. It's wanting to get the case over and done with and clear your name or have the consequences.
And this now is making some things that I remember reading in the news over the years make sense. Where I know that a couple of years ago there was some like really awful reporting. The reporting was good, but it was like really awful news about things like bondsmen showing up and like shooting at people who had like not showed up for court because the bondsmen want their money back. So they like sent somebody to go get the person to bring them to court.
Yeah, so that's definitely, there are people who work sometimes for bonds, companies, and they, that's what that lawsuit was about. It was essentially a lawsuit that, the kind of the bondsmen who go and make sure that you come back to court so that the company gets its money back had gone a little bit rogue and started to, they were kind of their own, police agency almost, or they were doing like this kind of law enforcement, like picking people up, or in some cases like kidnapping them, sort of.
This is where bounty hunters come in, I'm assuming.
Wait, what? Bounty hunters? Yes, that's exactly the word that I was looking for. That had escaped me. But yes, that's essentially what they were, being bounty hunters, and that got way out of hand, especially since
like all sorts of negative incentives for bad behaviors from everyone involved.
Right. Yeah. So what we could do is, eliminate the use of money bail and decide, okay, whether is this person, a danger or not? And then we can just, kind of think about that question instead of, I'm going to put money as a condition of release when, technically, and we've said this before, it is easier sometimes or often to be rich and dangerous than poor and innocent.
Yeah.
So what is the money doing for us? And that's really the question.
Yeah. I'm thinking of, and I'm sure anyone watching this is thinking of plenty of famous cases of famous people who did, heinous things, who get a bail number that sounds large, but they got that kind of cash. And so they get in there out.
Right.
Or they have, benefit, or like, let's hit the nail on the head. I think about every time a police officer finally gets arrested for killing a black person, and then their bail gets posted like immediately by some like Back the Blue group who like raises money for them.
Yeah. Huh. Yes. These are all, examples of what it's like to, go through the system when money is the incentive. And, that's just the first step of a district attorney making decisions about your case and your life. They can also, they make, a lot of this question, when we're talking about race, a lot of the questions we have for district attorneys is around accountability. And it's, I wanted to we could talk about racism all night. We could probably talk about it for the next, 15 years. But I just want to quickly note that racism rears its head in all parts of the criminal legal system. And the district attorney really has the power to acknowledge that and address and actively work to eliminate those disparities. And so these questions around collecting and analyzing data based on race, age, and gender to identify disparities, sharing that data, and taking action to remedy those disparities in all of these decision points are really, really important. And it's really important as the next DA takes office, because when you look at the population that is in our jail, you'll see that the majority of those people who are locked up are Black, between the ages of 20 and 45, and they are male, even though that same demographic of people makes up less than a quarter of our population. And so accountability could look like a lot of different things. It could look like, in some places, community accountability groups or community oversight mechanisms established to hold the district attorney accountable to campaign promises or to the values of the community. There are a lot of different models, but accountability really is key. So that's accountability on everything, including bail and including charging. So a district attorney makes a decision about what you are charged for and when. So I really want to go, even though this is the last point on the slide, to say not everything has to be prosecuted. A district attorney has the choice to decide whether or not something is prosecuted. In Louisiana, so if we start at the first part of this kind of flow chart, the law allows very long charging periods. So say your money bail is set. If you can pay, the district attorney has up to 120 days for a misdemeanor or 150 days for a felony to decide if they're going to charge you at all. If you cannot pay, you are in jail waiting up to 45 days and up to 60 days on a felony. And I say up to a lot like that because it doesn't mean that a DA should take all that time. In fact, some DA offices charge people within 48 hours. They make those decisions within 48 hours. Some make that decision within 5 days. And while you're waiting in jail, your livelihood is on the hook. So just like that couple I talked about, what could happen is you lose your job. If you don't have your job, you lose your house. If you don't have a house, you might lose your kids, and all sorts of other things ensue, right? And that puts, wait, say that again?
Then it's your fault for all of that happening.
Right. There's no help, right? And so what if after all of that happens, on the 60th day, they're like, nah, never mind. You're good. Yeah. We don't want to do this.
And then good luck getting your job back because you were
right. You can't get your job back at that point. You've been in jail for 2 months, And so this causes a destabilization, which if we want to talk about the things that prevent crime, figuring out what we're going to do with someone's case much, much, much sooner than 60 days is really one of those important things, right? Because if you're destabilized like this and you lose all of your livelihood, you could end up, and you're likely to be in this cycle of having to figure out other ways that might not be the ways that, you have to figure out other ways of being resilient. And sometimes that means turning to crime. So, that's just something that people really need to think about in this space. I also want to note that district attorneys do have the influence over what people are even arrested for. In some parts of the country, some prosecutors choose not to prosecute quality of life offenses. So things like loitering or trespass or things like that, things that pose no threat to public safety. Some district attorneys' offices do not charge cases arising from items found in a traffic stop, which can lead police to stopping to arrest for those things. Do you mean
you get stopped for speeding and they find like you have a joint in your car and you're like, oh, now you're going to jail because you have weed?
Right, exactly that. So that's what the traffic stop that I'm talking about is. So it starts like a traffic stop. It ends up finding, weed or a gun for which you don't have a permit. And then that becomes the reason that you're in jail. And some district attorneys' offices have decided if it comes from a traffic stop, we aren't going to do anything about it. So that changes policing practices. And that goes back to this conversation about figuring out how to eliminate racial disparities.
Can I pause you here before you continue going?
Yes, for sure.
I think anyone who's engaging in this and is watching this has probably learned enough about the criminal justice system to know that like the fact that we make money off of incarcerating people is part of why the racism and why the system perpetuates itself. But as far as I understand it, and this is part of why I'm enjoying getting to do this is to learn, is that you start making money off of a person when they're like incarcerated after like the trial and stuff like that. So like, I guess what I'm trying to understand is like, one of the things I always try to understand is what is the negative incentives that currently exist within this system that could lead to a DA to do this? Because like, hypothetically, like if you in the most like generous reading of the way someone would behave in this role, you would want to have to deal with as little cases as possible. So you prosecute the ones that actually like would do something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what you're saying makes sense. I think that yes, there are money incentives in the criminal justice system, of course. But I think also that the system has created it's kind of this perpetuating thing, right? That it's a whole system. So not just one person is at fault for how it is. We actually, have to go back historically to how we set this up, why we set this up, and what I say we, but I mean,
it was the people that look like you and me,
right? It wasn't us, but it was. Why did we set this up? Why did this get set up in this country in this way? And when you think about that, then you have to start. When the foundation is shaky, it's time to start thinking about the things that we're doing, which is why we have this focus on reshaping what prosecution is and what it does, because for so long, the idea has been just like lock up as many people as possible, charge as many cases as possible. And that's kind of where we go to this idea of like, you don't have to be charged with anything. Some of these things that we call crimes are just, we as in legislators make crime. Like we go up to Baton Rouge and we come up with ideas for what should sentences be, what should be a crime, what should be enhanced and made the most, have the most serious penalty. So those are questions that we make. Locally in New Orleans, a district attorney can also decide if you're charged with a municipal or a city offense, a municipal or city offense versus a state offense, which has a wide-ranging impact on you. So for instance, let's take the case of someone who's on parole for a domestic violence charge, right? And then later goes and beats up his ex-wife's new boyfriend pretty badly, and that person ends up in the hospital. Charging that person with a municipal case wouldn't affect the parole. It won't violate the parole. That person can stay out. But charging that person with a state case would violate the parole and put that person in prison. And depending on who you are, sometimes that decision is made to be the best, the easiest thing, or the thing that will least likely disrupt your life. But then sometimes, depending on who you are, it's the most stringent thing. And we've seen in Louisiana, people serve time like 13 years for having 2 joints, right? Because of some of the ways that we've, incentivized this system. In the adult system, the district attorney also has the sole discretion about whether or not to charge children as adults. In the youth system, there's actually a lot of discretion for the district attorney for kids. There are almost no mandatory minimums. Judges can bring kids home from juvenile prison early if they would like. So the district attorney could play a huge role by not seeking prison terms at all or not opposing early release. And so, there's a lot at stake here, right? There's just a lot at stake. The questions you can ask your district attorney candidates: what offenses would you consider declining? Or what offenses would you consider refusing? Under what circumstances, if any, would your office charge a child as an adult? What will your office's time period be for case screening? And that, that gets at all, like everything that we've just talked about.
So I have a question for myself, and then I want to ask a question that I received from the audience.
Yes.
That first one about what could a district attorney, and specifically could our district attorney say, and basically say this publicly so that like the police know this as well. I'm not charging anybody who's being charged for nuisance things. So if you're picking people up for things like loitering, trespassing, simple possession of marijuana, I'm just not doing it. Like,
yes, district attorney can make that choice.
They could effectively legalize those things and stop criminalizing them. I'm just not going to charge it. And so, it's like, I'm trying to understand for myself, like, that's when we talk about like the real power that a district attorney could have. Because basically, if I'm understanding what you've been explaining correctly, a district attorney really is the one who decides what crime is, because like they decide what gets charged or not. And they could just say, you can keep arresting people for this thing, but I'm just not going to charge them. So stop doing that.
Right. That's essentially what I'm saying. So we could decide, the district attorney could decide, I am no longer going to be charging anyone for being drunk in public. It's not going to be a charge. So, if you're a police officer or you're the department, the top brass, as they say, you could just say, so we're not going to arrest for that because it's sort of a waste of our time.
Yeah. And I don't mean to use a scare tactic to like get people to like understand the gravity of this, but like think about a state like Louisiana, which has tried very hard to pass laws to do things like make protesting illegal. Now imagine what a DA like Leon Canizero would do with that and the number of people they would charge. And think about a DA that's not like Canizero, who's like, I'm not going to charge anybody that you arrested for protesting.
So a district attorney can make any of those decisions. So they can decide we're not charging this case. So if they get, a bunch of people in, jail who have all been arrested for protesting, or they've been arrested for something like that at the first appearance, like we talked about, the district attorney could say, Judge, this is not a case. We're dropping these charges, or we're not pursuing charges on this. It could be that quick. It could be done. Yeah.
Before I let you continue the next slide, so I'm going to ask this question from Nicole. By the way, for those of you watching out there, if you put your name, I'm going to say it. So if you want your question to be anonymous, don't put your name. Nicole asks, I often see officials cite obscure examples of people who went off to commit serious crimes when released without bail. How can we counter these justifications?
So this goes back to the purpose of bail. It's about this instance, right? And whether or not this person on this instance is going to come back for their case. That anything else that person does has nothing to do with that instance. It can't be that we look at, and this is, I think what happens here is this is how we get some of our racial disparities. We look at certain people, and people look at certain people and say, I don't know, this person was arrested for, let's say, dealing, selling drugs, right? So that person's arrested for that. And now all of a sudden I have this whole narrative about this person and how they're dangerous. We can't let them get out. They have now done these like horrible, like that can't be how we're doing it. It's not about future crime. It's about this crime. And it's about whether or not this person is coming back for this crime. So sometimes people want to start this, people are going to run loose and everything's going to be mayhem. That's not true. And actually this brings me to like a quick plug, not for me, but for an article that folks should read called Americans Think That Crime is Out of Control, They're Wrong. That's maybe you could get a bunch of talking points from that, but that it's not true that we have these rising crime rates and the inner city is on fire. That's not true. It's what is, and so we have to also take the headlines out of it, right? Because headlines are meant to sell papers. They should not be used for making policy. And
according to somebody's president, because it's certainly not mine, according to somebody's president, crime is the worst you've ever seen it. And it's only in democratic cities, apparently, somehow.
Yeah, the studies and the data show differently. I think, did I answer those questions?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Ron.
So this conversation, this decision point is about diversion. And diversion is just a fancy word for an off-ramp from the criminal legal system. So basically, diversion could be a lot of different things. So say after the district attorney decides, yes, this is a case that we are going to actually charge and move forward with the charge, they can decide to divert the case and to a wide range of diversion programs, or they can decide to continue with traditional prosecution. Diversion programs could look like community service. They could look like mediation, treatment of underlying issues. So sometimes that means substance use treatment or mental health treatment. So a lot of treatment. It could also look like restorative justice. And restorative justice is a word that gets bandied about a lot, but essentially restorative justice is a framework for addressing crime that prioritizes the person who survived the crime or the family of a person who is a victim of crime, rather than state or local prosecutors. And restorative justice is not seeking to like lock someone up, throw away a key, isolate people, or punish them when they commit crimes, but instead to offer accountability and community support. And so diversion and restorative justice and all of these different things can actually be available for a wide variety of offenses. Some district attorneys really limit that, but others really think about, okay, well, how do we actually get what we really need in terms of accountability and repairing harm that has happened? The setup for these could be for different diversion programs. So there are a lot of models for these. So I'm just saying like kind of some of the options that people have. They can be run by a community-based organization that's outside of the system. And so the model would be divert things fully out of the system and have an outside organization deal with them. And when the successful completion happens, communicate to the district attorney's office that this has happened and end the case. So the questions you can ask your district attorney candidates about diversion are about what alternatives to prosecution they envision their office using or investing in, what crimes, what types of crimes are they going to consider diversion for, and how are they going to support and work with community-based organizations. In my in the work that we do, of course, I have to shout out that like a lot of different people help with, the work that we're doing around reshaping prosecution. I shout out my team, Michaela O'Connor-Bano and Josh Pichon. So I just wanted to shout that out. I also want to shout out that I talked to some former prosecutors about some of this diversion stuff. And one of the things that they said is sometimes it's really frustrating because you want to do diversion, but some of the programs just don't exist or they've gone away. And some of these services have gone away or they're not matched properly. And so that's one of the things that it seems like a lot of people are interested in. And so some of the role of the district attorney can be to foster these relationships and these partnerships to ensure robust diversion opportunities. So we just have a couple more decision points, and the district attorney can has a big role in discovery, and this is basically legalese for evidence in a case. And so the question is for this district attorney candidate, there are a lot of things that you can do with discovery. You can provide all of the discovery, all of the evidence to the defense team as soon as possible, or you could provide only what's required and provide that at the last possible moment. That causes some issues, right? If somebody is trying to, prepare their case, prepare their defense, if they get some evidence at the end, it causes some problems because then they can't prepare their case. All people who are accused of a crime are entitled to receive discovery. And so district attorneys can different district attorneys' offices can really change up what's received when it's received. Some places do this thing called open file discovery, which means that everything the DA has that they can share, they will share to the defense attorney and the accused person. The timing of that could be very early, or it could change. This also reminds me, I don't know how many people have seen this movie. I really find it entertaining to watch in the background sometimes. And maybe I'm embarrassing myself, but The Lincoln Lawyer.
I love that movie.
It came up in The Lincoln Lawyer where, discovery was shared, but a key piece of evidence was missing until very late. So the Lincoln Lawyer himself, Matthew McConaughey, thought he was oh, I got this case in the bag. But actually, no, that's not what happened. And I don't want to ruin it. His client was a liar. Anyway, that's one of the things, that's a discovery issue, right? So if you get something at the beginning that's not, early on, that's not what you need. And then the day before your case, you're like, oh no, I'm blindsided. That this causes problems. And so the question for the district attorney is how and when will you share discovery with people who are charged and their lawyers? It's a pretty simple question. You could hear a lot. Yes.
Well, okay, I wanted to say, are there rules?
Yes.
Because my basic understanding of what your rights are is that you're supposed to have all the information you need to defend yourself against your crime. But are there set rules that are outside the purview of an elected official like this? That's no, you definitely got to give it by this time, or is it completely within the purview of the district attorney to do this?
Right. So in Louisiana, there are rules about this. They're not always the best rules. They don't give they're the floor, not the ceiling, right? So one of the rules, you must give discovery. So anything you're going to use against an accused person, you must give it over to them. Anything that clears them of the crime, you must give to them. That's called Brady evidence. And that is very important evidence. If that is not turned over, because a person should know that they're cleared of this crime and I have an alibi witness. Someone said I wasn't there. Someone said I was with them at the time. That information must be given over to the person. In some cases, some evidence can just be given over the day before trial. That doesn't give you much time to prepare, or the day of. It doesn't give you time to prepare. And so, a district attorney really could be a leader in deciding. I want everyone to be on an even playing field. I want to make sure that all of the evidence we have goes over to the defense and, not let the chips fall where they may, but let's give everyone a chance to make their case. That could be, a district attorney could be a leader in that way. And so that's, those are kind of the questions you're kind of looking for, how are you going to share discovery? You're looking for some of these words about people say as soon as possible. What does that mean? Tell us more. Are you just going to be following what the law says, which doesn't give a lot of time? Or are you going to really make this a real effort and really try to put fairness into the process? And I know I don't have very much left. I'm doing a time check for myself.
You're doing great.
Okay, perfect. So, a district attorney has a very large role in case processing. And case processing, so this goes back to the rules, right? The constitutional rules are that we're all entitled to a speedy trial. But what ends up happening is the speedy trial might happen at some point, but after all of these administrative things happen. So sending over the discovery that you're entitled to, and then you might see something in the discovery or your lawyer sees something, and then it's oh, we have to continue this case because we have to go hunt down this lead or investigate this further. The district attorney can decide to, what they're going to do about your plea offers, and then figure out some different trials, and really this puts people in limbo for quite a period of time. So the accused person, the person that is hoping for a resolution, who is a crime survivor, and the families of all of those people. Currently, there is a man in the New Orleans, in our jail, who has been waiting for a trial since 2015.
What?
Yes, 2015. That's 5 years ago. And in fact, we looked at some data at people in Baton Rouge who are in the Baton Rouge jail, saw a person in jail for 7 years.
So,
and yeah.
Hold on. So I know that there's the limits on charging. So technically there's no limit on how long it could actually, for you to get a trial. So like you could charge and they could be there indefinitely.
So in some cases, so basically the district attorney has like all of this influence with the judge in determining the speed of the process. There aren't as many, there aren't really speed limits on how long this can take. And usually you should try to make it go faster. It could go much faster. But in these cases, there's just a new thing happening every time. So, the real thing to think about here is if our legal system is about accountability or guilt and innocence, it shouldn't take 5 years. It shouldn't take 7 years, because at this point, this person is in limbo. The person who was accused is in limbo. And we have to note that because a crime is committed, it doesn't actually mean that this accused person is guilty.
Yeah.
So this person is in jail awaiting trials and going to different motions hearings and trying to figure out, oh, this is a hearing about whether or not we should use experts. This is another hearing about whether or not the witnesses are competent, or whether or not this person is competent, or there are just all of these different things that get in the way of moving forward the case with deliberate speed. And so that could mean that after all of that's said and done, there isn't enough evidence. It's clear that this person didn't do it, et cetera, et cetera. And now this thing is starting over for the crime survivor who's still, not gotten what they needed from the justice system.
Not to mention, if the person is innocent, then the person who actually did it has been just like chilling for 5 years.
Yeah. Has just been out there. And if this is about guilt and innocence, this process shouldn't take this time.
On this one, and so on this one specifically, and I probably can assume the answer myself. Is there like a standard? Like, is there because I'm sure like each one of these things takes a certain amount of time, and it's all like circumstantial based on like each individual. Right. Like, is there a standard that's like you should definitely be able to do all of this in X amount of time?
So it really varies. I think it just really, really varies. That one is a hard question to answer. And that, you're really looking for your district attorneys to come up with some answers about how are we going to make this timely. And, one of the things that, Vera we're really happy that we have this national reshaping prosecution team that actually helps train people on the best practices. People who are former prosecutors who were thinking like, we need a better way. And so, this is prosecutors training prosecutors about how to move forward. So our reshaping prosecution team is very focused on, how do we have an efficient process, but a fair process? How do we make sure that these problems that have seeped in around, or problems that are kind of foundational to the system of, systemic racism, how do we make sure that we're actually actively addressing those and not having race neutral solutions to a race-based problem, So there are just a lot of things here that can be set up, but this one's a hard one, right? It's a hard one.
Let me ask this question.
But yeah.
Let me ask this question in a different way. What's a good answer to this question? So, like, if I'm on a candidate forum with the DA candidates, and I'm like, "Hey, how are you going to ensure that the cases are processed?" Like, what's a good answer to that?
Oh, well, see, now we're veering into my 501c3. I can't give any answers to this test.
That's
Yeah, no, but I think that what you're getting at though is a combination of what are positions on bail and what is the position on case processing, right? So if you're moving in a timely manner, then a person shouldn't be languishing in jail while you're trying to figure out all of these different parts of their case, right? And just because they're poor. And so a timely manner looks different if a person's in jail versus whether or not a person is out and about living their life and doing, the things that going to work and paying their bills, right? So it looks different, right? In both ways. And so that's why a lot of this case processing question or case screening question comes down to how quickly can you figure out whether or not this person is charged? And how quickly can we figure whether or not you're going to hold this person in jail for any longer on bail?
And you explaining that reminds me of because something that I'm trying to remind myself is that this is when we get back to the money issue, that all of this works the other way, where you think about, some rich and famous person who commits a crime against someone who is not rich and famous, and they can get an army of lawyers to make that case go as long as possible to essentially make the victim give up.
Yeah. Oh, those are, yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you're right. That could work in the opposite way. And that's interesting because sometimes, that works in the civil context, right? That's sometimes what happens. Like people are like,
somebody's president is really good at that one specifically.
So, right. So figuring out a way to delay. I heard that he might not be your president. That's what I've heard from you tonight. But I think I also could have intuited it. So one of the things is, if you delay, then sometimes people will just give up. But in this case, someone's life is on the line, which is something I just have to keep reiterating, that livelihoods are on the line. And just because there's one person, right, in jail having to deal with this case, but actually you've jailed the whole family and everyone who might have may have, who may rely on that person, who might be a caretaker of that person, a whole house. And sometimes, when you think about the closeness of very many neighborhoods, the whole neighborhood is on the line here, for figuring this out. So this needs to be resolved in a timely way. So we want to know from candidates, what is your timely process? How are you going to figure this part out?
Can I ask one more sidebar question?
For sure.
I promise I'm gonna let you get through the whole presentation. Like most people, my knowledge of the justice system is just what I hear in the news and learn from people like you, and then what I see in procedural shows. And so I think most people who's seen Law and Order, you see the person gets convicted and then they talk about credit for time served, which I'm assuming that's the whole process part is that if your trial and the whole thing took 3 years, then your sentence is 5 years, you get credit for time served and you only have 2 years. What happens if you end up getting convicted for something? What happens if you end up getting convicted and your time, your conviction sentence is less than the time you served? Or if you're innocent and you shouldn't have gotten anything, what happens then?
Well, you don't get that time back. It's not like anyone's going to compensate you for that time either.
So there's no sort of
just that your life.
Sorry, you were in jail for 5 years. My bad.
That's it's not even a my bad. It's over.
Wow.
So, and these are the realities of our system.
Is there anything you can do in that scenario if you were innocent ultimately? This person that's in OPP for 5 years, if their case is innocent, there's nothing they can do about the 5 years.
No.
Jesus.
No, you don't get the time back. I mean, there are some things you could do, right? If there's there's sometimes more complicated things you could do. But, there's another piece of this, which is, DAs have immunity around their decisions. And so, even if it's a bad decision, if it was a terrible decision, there's immunity about that decision. So no, I guess you go home to whatever home you might still have left, and or you go home to whatever family you might still have left. Because sometimes, and this has happened to very many of the young people or people that I've worked with or known who have been impacted by the system, is sometimes people die in your family while you're in jail, waiting to figure something out. And then everything is cleared after you've spent time in jail for one of the young people I know spent time in jail for 1.5 years on something he absolutely didn't do. And they finally figured that part out. And while he was in jail, his father died and he couldn't go to the funeral. You don't get out for that. And then when it was over, it was just like, oh, it's over. Meanwhile, his life has been, he's still dealing with that. And that was like 4 years ago. So this is not, this is like, again, people's lives are at stake. And so this is why this is very important. So in the second, what comes after, this actually can happen at a lot of different times. So it's just coming after in the slides, but plea deals. And so most cases, so unlike and I'm glad you brought up Law and Order, most cases don't go like that. A case will likely end with a plea deal, not a trial. And so what happens is the district attorney makes a plea, and in our context in New Orleans, there are a lot of different types of pleas you can make. So we kind of really simplified this. No prior convictions mean you might, be offered to, okay, you plead guilty to this, but the sentence will be less than the maximum sentence allowed for this crime. Or you plead for this, you plead for a reduced charge, and that means also reduced time. If you have prior convictions, you plead, the offer is you plead guilty as charged, but we won't multiple bill you. And I'll get to what a multiple bill means in a second. But the problem here is that often plea deals go away, right? So you're offered, before a trial gets going, you're offered, say, 3 years. But if we go all the way through to, but that plea, like the longer we go, is going to go away. So sometimes we call those exploding pleas. So they have a time and then they go away. This really puts a person between a rock and a hard place, because on one hand, they're like, well, sometimes maybe they've been in jail for 5 years and they're like, I just want to have a time certain. I just want to go home. So like whatever that time is, I'm going to get credit. And then, I'll just plead for this. Or they're like, I should take my chances at trial because I didn't do it. And so I need to take my chances with that, but now it's still a longer period of time. So you really have no bargaining power, little or no bargaining power as the person who is accused. And for some people, if you have prior convictions, that means that the sentence, whatever it was, say the minimum was 5, it might now be, because of your previous sentence, your previous convictions, it now is enhanced to 15. That's the minimum, no matter what. And so multiple bill that kind of phrasing is like the kind of phrase that, kind of the short slang that people use for the habitual offender statute. And so we'll get to that more in the next couple of slides. But, for that person, it's like, well, do I take the 5 now, or do I take my chance at 15? Because that could be really terrible. And so the question is, what guidance and authority are you going to give your prosecutors with respect to plea offers? And will you allow them to make initial offers that are much less than the maximum penalty allowed? What are you going to allow them to do with respect to plea deals? And I think, people have had, there are a lot of conversations that have been had about whether or not, prosecutors are able to, like kind of look at their cases because they're the closest to the cases and kind of look at them and figure out, oh, okay, let's figure out what plea offers I can give versus, if somebody's orientation to the system is to be as aggressive as possible, then those plea offers are much more stringent. And so those are the questions at play, the considerations at play. And our final district attorney decision point is about sentencing. And this is where, we are talking about the habitual offender statute. So say you're found guilty, you've gone to trial, you've gone all the way through this process. The district attorney makes a sentencing recommendation. The district attorney has two choices to think about. Okay, is this person should I multiple bill this person or not? And if this person has prior convictions, do I use the habitual offender statute to limit the judge's discretion to give them a certain sentence? That can happen. And their decision carries a lot of weight with the judge. Their recommendation carries a lot of weight with the judge, and also their discretion to use the habitual offender can sometimes just take the choice away from the judge. And so, often probation is not allowed when you're sentenced if there's a mandatory minimum on your on the thing that you're being accused of, or the things that you have now been convicted of, rather. And so, something that we've, talked about a lot, or a lot of people have talked about this, or kind of starting to think about this. Why do pleas explode, right? So if earlier you were willing during plea bargaining stage to offer 2 years, that should still be the offer, or that should still be a sentence at the end. Again, this isn't haggling at the French market. This is a person's life and a person's rights. And so we have to be really careful about all of these decisions. And so this is where this district attorney's power is really, really strong. Again, questions for your candidates. What best practices will inform your sentencing recommendations? Also, will you recommend alternatives to incarceration or other community-based alternatives like substance abuse treatment, mental health services, a lot of the things we talked about earlier with diversion? Those are also available for sentencing. So now we're at the end where I can open up for even more questions. I wanted to let folks know that we have these tools available, like these questions and more, and just information that folks can read on their own time if they would like to. We have those available. We have these available. Just get in touch. You can also view them online, like at this website, which again, it'll be in the slides that I send you.
Thank you. I actually don't see any more questions, so I'm going to take all of this very well, which you did. I feel much more equipped to be a participant in the DA forums that are to come. And so I'm just going to say thank you so much, Sarah, for this.
Great.
Really helpful. I learned a lot. I need a glass of wine because I am now ending my day very angry about the way that this system works. Don't
be angry, be empowered.
I was already angry, but you can't defeat a system that you don't understand, right? And so I'm really
true.
I'm really glad that we got to do this and that you were agreed to do it, so that you can't change something that you don't completely understand. And so much of what you said today, you hear snippets of it, you see really bad stories in the news, but unless you have a job like yours, or you're unfortunate enough to end up in the system, or your attorney that's trying these cases, your average person doesn't know that this is how it goes. And I certainly didn't know that the DA had this sort of power essentially over, like you said, people's lives, because every single person that goes through this process, the whole time it takes, that's their life at best on hold, at worst completely ruined. And so the DA really does hold a ton of power. And thank you so much for explaining all of that to us. Anyone watching this, I will make sure that we as Indivisible send out through our newsletter the tools that Sarah is referencing. I will get this presentation from Sarah and we'll send it out in that newsletter. If you're not already signed up for our newsletter, you can sign up by going to indivisibleNOLA.com. And if you watch this presentation and you're feeling like I want to be able to use these questions, you have a chance tomorrow. Tomorrow, the Youth Justice Coalition, of which we are part of, is having a DA candidate forum with the 4 candidates for District of New Orleans, focus on youth justice. So you can ask a lot of these questions about how they're going to treat our kids and our youth that are involved in the system. And you can ask them tomorrow evening. You can find that information about how to access that forum on any of our platforms. You can find it on our website. You can find it it'll be on Instagram, it'll be on Twitter. It'll be hard to miss if you look for it at all. And with that, I'm going to let everyone go and let you get to the rest of your evening. Sarah, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This was really great. And I hope that all of you guys out there vote and that this gives you information to be able to make an informed choice come November.